Today, I'm talking to Maulik Bhansali, Senior Portfolio Manager and co-head at Allspring Global Investments. He grew up in New Jersey, started his career as an actuary, and earned a master's in quantitative finance at Berkeley before spending the last couple of decades in the Bay Area managing fixed income portfolios. So, this was a really good conversation. We got into how numbers meet judgment in investing, what it was like growing up Indian American on the East Coast, passing culture on to the next generation, and why embracing your full identity, even the hidden parts of it, can actually be an edge in life and work. So this was a great conversation. I hope you enjoy. Well, thank you so much again for coming on to have this conversation with me. I guess we can just start off by like telling me about where you grew up, what you do now, sort of what keeps you busy.
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in New Jersey and stayed in that New Jersey, New York area for a bit and then came to the Bay Area in the late 90s. So I've been around here for a bit and I work in finance now. So I work in investment management. I'm a portfolio manager in fixed income. So I've been doing that for quite some time. And that's yeah, that's kind of where I am now.
Yeah, how was that transition from like New Jersey, from the East Coast to the West Coast? Was that like for education or work or?
No, no. So I was working in New York City at the time, and I was kind of like a couple years out of college. And it was just one of those things. I having grown up in the East Coast and around New York City my whole life, I just thought, oh, I gotta try living in California for a couple of years and then come back. It was one of those things I thought would be temporary. And then I kind of came here, and now it's been 25 years, and I just never went back. It gets harder and harder to go back as you stay here. So it's a great place to live. So it was really mostly just yeah, I was able to get a transfer with my company, and I just wanted to check out what life in California is like.
No, yeah, it's definitely way better here. So. But I guess more on that part, like, how would you describe sort of like your college experience and like when you knew what career you wanted to pursue? Because I know like you worked in insurance and then you kind of like transitioned a bit to like investment banking. So like, how did you kind of make that switch and what kind of like prompted that?
Yeah, I mean, so I studied economics in college. Really, I've always been a math person, so my focus was on kind of pretty quantitative things. So when I started out after college, I became an actuary, which is a pretty quantitative field, and I worked for a consulting firm. So basically, it's like statistics, a lot of probability and statistics and things like that. But, I did that for about 4 or 5 years, and I realized that I really just wanted to be more in finance than on the actuarial side. It was just a little bit dry and not super fun for me. So I went back to grad school at that point to get a master's in quantitative finance, basically. And I did that at Berkeley because I was already living in San Francisco at the time. So that helped me make the transition into finance. And so out of that program, I got an internship in investment management and then went from there.
Yeah, so I guess I've grown up in the Bay Area all my life with a lot of Indian people around me. I've seen various like types of dynamics, various types of ways in which like Indian American culture is passed on from parents to children. So I kind of want to like direct this to you as a parent. How would you sort of describe one, your experience growing up as an Indian American in the East Coast, and then how do you feel about like raising your kids now in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, so my parents came to America in the 60s, so it was still fairly, it didn't have quite the Indian community that we do now. But it was New Jersey. There are a lot of Indian people in New Jersey and New York City, and so they definitely had their community. They had quite a few friends that they knew from India, and my parents were really involved in a lot of the sort of the cultural groups and clubs and things that were in our area. So we did grow up, me and my brother, or surrounded by Indian culture, celebrating Indian holidays, and all my parents' friends were Indian, and we went to India every summer for vacation. So we certainly grew up pretty immersed in that, in Indian culture, and we spoke Gujarati, not that well, but I did grow up. My parents taught us Gujarati. We grew up with that a lot. Now, for I have one kid, and my partner is not Indian. And living in the Bay Area, I don't really have a very strong community of like Indian friends or family around me. So we've sort of lost that, unfortunately, that I haven't really been able to pass on a lot of that sort of cultural foundation to my kid. Certainly my mother tries to do that. When we see her, and I think that's the primary way in which my kid kind of gets that exposure, but it's a lot less than I wish I was able to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess like more on that part of like growing up in a very like I guess Indian environment, would you say like there was a tradition or like something that your parents may have like really insisted on that you kind of didn't like growing up, but now you like look back and really love it?
My parents were fairly liberal in the sense that they recognized that they had moved to America and that they knew that their kids were going to be American. And so they didn't, they accepted that and they didn't try to kind of force too much stuff on us. Probably the number one thing is the food that I kind of like I didn't appreciate at the time. And now, I mean, it's my favorite kind of food. I love it. And the language as well. Like I'm really thankful that I have that in me. I don't use it enough, but I have it. At the time, it was kind of annoying to speak in a different language or to kind of hear the accents and that kind of thing. But now I'm so thankful that I was raised kind of knowing another language.
Yeah. So you spoke Gujarati with your parents and family and stuff, or
My parents, I think my mother tried a lot. My grandmother didn't really speak English, so with her, it was only Gujarati. She lived in India, so it wasn't like we were around her all the time. But my parents tried, and really it was my parents spoke to their friends in Gujarati a lot and to our extended family. So it was just constantly around us. It wasn't quite so much that we as a family spoke in Gujarati at home, but it was just constant immersion, I think. That was really nice.
yeah. So I guess more on that. Like, would you say there was something that maybe like your mom made or like a food or like a dish or something that like your non-Indian friends growing up they would come to your house and find really like cool or surprising?
Probably not. I mean, that was probably one of the things I was maybe a little embarrassed about at the time, just because it was, this was in the 80s. And so Indian food wasn't everywhere. It wasn't like people, and I didn't go to a school where there were a lot of Indian people or have Indian friends. So it was a very different, it wasn't something that a lot of people were exposed to at the time, unless you kind of were Indian yourself. So that probably was one of the things, like, the smells and things like that,
Yeah, yeah.
that maybe I was a little embarrassed of at the time, that now I think it's awesome. But I think at that time it was such a different, unique thing that I probably was a little ashamed of it at the time.
Yeah. So like yeah, like pinpointing on that like embarrassment part. Would you say like you dealt with that embarrassment by like sort of downplaying parts of your identity, or would you say that like it was kind of just like a negative part of embracing your culture?
I think I just tried to keep things separate, right?
Mhm.
I probably did sort of downplay that aspect of my identity when I was really young. I guess before going to college, or maybe like before going to high school. Um, During those years, I would say probably downplayed that aspect of my identity quite a bit. And again, it was like a different time, being in the 80s. And I don't think there was quite the sort of the even though I grew up in a place where there were so many ethnicities, it was very diverse in northern New Jersey and New York City, of course, but it was still not super diverse where, I went to school or the people, our neighbors, or that kind of thing. So I certainly wasn't playing that aspect of myself up by any means.
Yeah. And so would you say that diversity was like kind of like a superpower for you growing up so that you were able to like see these various different cultures? Or was that not really that important?
I wouldn't call it a superpower when I was growing up. I think it definitely helped later in life, like certainly in college and then beyond that. But I recall growing up that it was more that I wanted to be like everyone else rather than I kind of saw the value of diversity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people struggle with that, like this like sort of conformist atmosphere where a lot of people do things like downplay their identity, downplay various things, even if they live in a very diverse environment, because people often shift to what's I guess considered normal, considered standardized. So I guess like do you have any advice for Indian American youth in the Bay Area right now, like currently struggling with things like things like cultural avoidance and stuff like that because of social media, because of like kind of like a little bit of a rise in stereotypes related to Indian people?
Yeah, I mean, I probably wasn't so great myself, right, when I was a kid about valuing that, but I definitely think that having that aspect of your identity it's an advantage, right? Being able to see multiple perspectives, having being able to straddle cultures, having empathy for others, right? All of those things are really beneficial. Like I think it just gives you a perspective that many others might not have. So I would say it's really find the value in it because it is a really valuable thing to have as a person.
Yeah, I do think it's really valuable. I do think that like these these various parts of our identity are often understated, they really make up who we are, and they really like make up our life experiences, like your experience growing up in a very diverse community, and like kind of what led you to kind of embrace that. I guess shifting more towards like your career and like your interest in math, your interest in economics, etc. How would you say that like being Indian American has been like sort of like a benefit for you in that part of your life?
I think it's really the way we were raised. Probably, I mean, certainly there were some very stereotypical ways about the way that we were raised, in the sense that my parents certainly put a lot of emphasis on education and tried to send me, to the best private school they could in New York. And then, I went to an Ivy League college, and sort of that instilling of like the importance of kind of achieving in education was a big part of kind of what I took right forward with me. And so I think there's a I hate to generalize, but there was certainly in the area that I grew up and the people that I grew up around, there was sort of this expectation of what your education would look like, what your career would look like. And fortunately for me, it didn't, I actually do enjoy what I do, and I didn't feel like I was pushed into something that I didn't want to do. But I think that kind of being surrounded by like all my parents' friends, right? All their kids are, doctors and in finance and lawyers, and sort of being surrounded by that. I think as long as you don't feel pigeonholed by it, or you don't feel like you're sort of not like you can't break that mold, right? There is something about that's those sorts of expectations that makes you feel like you can achieve, like you have a right to achieve, and that you see those achievements, like you see the adults around you having achieved a lot as well, right? So you know that it's in your power to achieve that too.
Yeah, definitely. And it's actually really cool how like you do acknowledge that there were several expectations, several like you need to go to this college, you need to do this, you need to have this job, but you still kind of found your own like path, and like you found a way to do what you love still. So I think honestly that's really cool. I guess like is there like a piece of advice you would say that like an elder gave you that kind of blended that like American practicality with sort of this Indian cultural wisdom?
Wow, that is an interesting question. I think it's probably from my father. My father was always deeply connected to India, right? And really felt like no matter how American he became or how long he lived in America, that was his home. And he never wanted to forget where he came from, but not just where he came from, but also what was still going on in India, right? What are the problems of India? And that sort of desire to give back and to understand, right, what the rest of the world looks like, right? So I think the advice, I guess it's not so much advice, but the perspective that he had kind of stayed with me was that yes, you can achieve everything you want in America because the opportunities in America are better than anywhere else. But never don't ever forget, where you're from, of course, but also like what is happening around the world, right? Where can you give back? Have those different perspectives, understand what's happening in the world, and make your mark in other ways. And so, sort of combining those two things, like taking advantage of the opportunities you have in America, right? And being as successful as you can, but also remembering where you came from and remembering what is happening outside your bubble. I think that's sort of what I probably the lesson that I took the most from the way I grew up and my parents in particular.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's important to remember so that you can obviously give back to communities, give back to like your culture, but also pass down that wisdom to other people who are like going through the same thing, who are going through like adaptation, who are going through like a caught between two worlds moment. So I guess like has there ever been like a specific event where you felt like you were caught between two worlds and sort of how did you navigate that?
Yeah, there's another aspect of my identity that we haven't talked about, which is that I'm gay. And so that was an additional layer of complexity in growing up, right, in Indian community where it's not, at least back then, not quite as accepted, right, as in others. And so being sort of caught, there certainly was a feeling of, well, do I have to choose one or the other? Can I not be both? And sort of being caught between wanting to have that closeness with my culture, wanting to have closeness with India, going back to see my relatives, but also having this other aspect of my identity, which didn't always kind of mesh well. So I think, especially when I was as a teenager or in my 20s, that sort of figuring out how to navigate that and be both, but still, be true to myself, be both, and how to, they're both important parts of who I am. Right. And so getting comfort around having both of those things be a big part of me it was hard, right, in the beginning. I think I found it now, but it was definitely a challenge.
Hmm. And would you say like some of the things you told yourself when you were sort of balancing this two worlds moment with like your Indian culture and like growing up in America, would you say that like those same lessons applied with this like being gay and being Indian, sort of like having all these expectations from your family and maybe like being gay is not often very accepted in Indian culture, like would you say that you kind of carried some of those lessons to kind of get through that and come out or
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same thing that you kind of feel when well, at least I felt a little bit when I was growing up about, sometimes wanting to hide the Indianness of who you are, or your family, or your home life, and whatever, when you're out in this American world, right? It's that same sort of feeling of sometimes feeling like you have to hide aspects of yourself. And so that feeling of growing up with these two cultures was definitely, I felt that again, right? In sort of that feeling of needing, or that instinct of needing to hide something about yourself. And so I definitely think that growing up with these two cultures helped me, because I kind of figured out how to deal with that, right? I figured out how to have both aspects of my identity be real and be important, and blend them, and sort of be proud, right, of all of that. So definitely it was all of those things kind of helped me along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. Like how you use these lessons from your childhood to apply it when you face a similar moment and like it led to being more proud, being more true to yourself. So that's really cool. I guess like how would you say that you kind of like so I'm guessing you say your partner is not Indian, right? Or
Correct.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I guess like how would you say you kind of balance that like that mixed race kind of like teaching different cultures to your kid and also like this like a little bit of like a uncommon family dynamic, how would you say you kind of like teach your kid how to understand these different things, understand these different worlds that they may not see their other friends have or they may not see when they go somewhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main lesson that we want to impart to our child, and I think all parents want this, right, is that, and I think it's in some ways it's easier for us because we've experienced what it's like to maybe be rejected or to have people kind of view you in a certain way that you don't like. I think the main lesson, and I think what really is that it gives you empathy, right? It gives you empathy of just trying to understand where somebody else is coming from, understanding that your experience is different from theirs is different from yours, right? And you may not completely relate or understand, but you can accept. And that's the main thing. It's like, I faced growing up and coming out and all that is people don't always understand you, right? But you don't need them to understand you. You just need them to accept you for who you are. Like we're always going to have a hard time connecting with other people, but just having grace and accepting that they're coming from a different place than you are, that's the biggest lesson that I think just our family dynamic kind of imparts that directly on my kid because we are kind of that have that unique perspective. So I think that's the main lesson, right? I think that's the main thing that we'd want our kid to take away, and I think they do.
No, yeah, I totally agree with you on that. I think that like you don't have to understand. You don't even have to like agree with some parts of like someone's culture, some things that they do, but as long as you're respecting them, you're accepting them, you're like understanding that like okay, this is their identity, this is how they're expressing themselves. I think that's how we have a civil and like a civil community and prevent these stereotypes from like manifesting into hatred.
Yeah.
So, I guess are you down to do some rapid fire questions?
Sure. I'll
Okay.
try.
Okay. What's the most stereotypically Indian thing that you can't live without?
Oh my God. What's the most stereotypical Indian thing that I can't live without? It's got to be the food, right? I don't
Hmm.
know. I can't the food for sure. The
What's your
chaat.
favorite food?
Yeah, it's like Chaat. Vic's Chaat
Shot.
House in Berkeley. It's so good.
Yeah, yeah. I'll check that out. What was the most awkward cultural misunderstanding you had that like now it's like pretty funny?
These are tough questions. Jeez.
Yeah.
Awkward cultural understanding. I mean, definitely when I was little, and well, not little, but I remember it in elementary school, like having a friend come over and like try some of the Indian candies that we had in the house and think it was like the most disgusting thing ever. And because it was just like a flavor that they had never experienced before. And I was so embarrassed at the time. And now I look back at that and I just crack up. I just think it's hilarious because it's like, yeah, that's growing up, that's trying new things, and that's fine. But I look back on some of those experiences, and it is funny now. It wasn't funny then.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think people often get really like emotional in the moment when they feel embarrassment, but like looking back, once you kind of get through that, you realize like, okay, this is just it's just food. It's just like, yeah. I
Yeah.
guess if your life had like a soundtrack, what Indian song and what American song would be playing?
What Indian song would be playing? Gosh, there's a very old movie called Gars. I think it's from the 80s, a Bollywood movie with the best soundtrack. Such a good soundtrack. I would say that entire soundtrack, the soundtrack to that movie would be perfect. And then an American song, soundtrack to my life. Jesus, gosh, I'd probably have to pick like, it's not American, but I'd probably have to pick something like Dancing Queen. It's my favorite song of all
Mm,
time. So
that song's great. Yeah.
it fits me.
Yeah. Um, oh yeah, 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 no, that's a really good song. So you like ABBA a lot? Or
I do. Well, yeah, I grew up but yeah, from the 70s and 80s, it was just playing when I was a kid.
Yeah. Is Dancing Queen like, is that associated with like kind of like the Pride movement? Or
It is a very popular song, especially from, a while ago. ABBA in general, I think is pretty pretty popular with gay people.
yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for coming on to have a conversation with me. It
Yeah,
was great.
happy to do it.
Yeah, thank you.
See ya.